that's the governing law of the startup world, that just whatever can go wrong will go wrong all the time whenever you don't think it's going to.
Hello, welcome to Founded and Grounded. I'm Laura Rawlings, hosting the podcast today alongside Ollie Collard, business startup coach. Hello, Ollie.
Hey, Laura, how you doing?
Yeah, all good, thank you. Really nice to see you. It feels like we've had a little bit of a break in between as things have been going on, but great to see you today.
We have, and what a break to have when the weather's been like this over the last month or so. So, yeah,
I
can't
know,
complain.
at last. We've been waiting for this and finally it's delivered. Ollie, let's talk about who we've got today as our featured entrepreneur, someone whose conversation I've really enjoyed listening to. Tell us who it is.
Yeah, so I spoke to Cam, who is one of the co-founders of a business called Unyoked. And essentially, they're all about reconnecting people back with nature. They have these sustainable off-grid cabins in remote locations around the world. And they are accessible to people in large cities. So they want to get people back into nature, but with less than 2 hours travel from a big city.
And they are as good as they sound, aren't they, Ollie?
They are amazing. I mean, if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say blissful. You've got these like beautifully constructed cabins with the most amazing, like stunning views from these large windows. You're in your own secluded field with everything you need at your fingertips. And I think the biggest thing is that they thought about everything from start to finish, like the whole experience. And coming away from the 2-day retreat, I just felt completely revived afterwards.
Well, I know he was glad when you gave him that feedback. Okay, so Ollie's already sampled this, as you can tell there. But should we do a little rewind and go back to how this came about in the first place? Because actually, Cam had a background in something completely different, didn't he? Something very useful, but rather different. It was in banking. So let's find out what prompted him to set up Unyoked with his twin brother, Chris.
Good evening, Cam. Thank you so much for coming on the Founded and Grounded show. How are you doing this evening?
Good, thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Quite okay, Cam. And I must say to our listeners, you are dialing in from Australia, so it's your evening, and it's obviously morning here in the UK. So really appreciate you taking time at the end of your day to speak to us.
No worries at all. We've been in the UK with Unyoked for like 7 months now, so we're getting used to these kind of days. Don't worry.
Wicked. Well, thank you very much. So firstly, Cam, I know your background is in banking, so I'm really intrigued by your origin story. So can you take us back to 2016 and tell us about what your frustrations were at the time and what inspired you to start Unyoked with your twin brother, Chris?
Yeah, no worries, man. I mean, I think banking's a hard word. Like I was in the strategy department there, and I didn't study finance. I dropped maths in year 10, so I don't think anyone would call me a banker by any chance. But I was working in a bank. Let's say that.
Yep.
But it actually, I guess it came from a lot earlier. So like, yeah, me and Chris, twin brothers, we grew up in Darwin, and then moved around Australia a whole bunch. So for those listeners, that's like the top of Australia. But then we moved around like the whole country sort of every few years as we were growing up. And I guess one of the constants while we were doing that was the outdoors. Like, when we'd move into a new city, we'd have no friends, we'd be at a new school, we'd just go into the outdoors, and we'd sort of go camping and things like that, and hiking. And gradually that went to overseas trips, which I don't know if it's the same over in the UK, but in Australia, like when you're at uni, during the summer holidays for 3 months, like everyone just goes overseas and you go backpacking. We went to like Nepal, Sumatra, South America, and to all these places where you'd be out in the middle of nowhere and you'd come back actually feeling different. Whereas then we jumped into sort of the corporate life, and my brother Chris worked at General Assembly. So it's like a fast-paced tech education startup. We sort of scaled the office in Sydney and then went over and started it in Singapore. Whereas I worked at Commonwealth Bank, Australia's largest bank, in the strategy department. So very different than where I am now. But we were sitting there with spreadsheets on our screen till 10 p.m. at night, like enjoying the jobs, but getting into that trap of just thinking that we were busy all the time, that we had to be busy, and the holidays that we'd take would be just generally packed with so much stuff that we would feel quite stressed and anxious and generally not that better afterwards. And the opportunity to have the little trips where you'd go camping or hiking or just disappear, they sort of disappeared. So what we were looking for was something that would put us out in the middle of nowhere, in touch with nature, but being able to do it within our sort of busy city life. So being able to do it on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday and then come back to the city. And that just simply didn't exist. Like there was camping, which is awesome, and we still advocate it a lot and do it ourselves, but it's a lot of hassle, right? And you got to get all the
Yeah.
stuff and everything like that. And then there was Airbnb, which was sort of starting around then and picking up really big. But there you've got like people's apartments, you've got a whole ton of neighbors around you, or it's just a piece of crap house in the middle of nowhere that's like on a farm or something with power lines and everyone else around you. So it just didn't really exist. And we were like, well, why don't we create it? And we had a couple of friends. One was an architect, one was a builder. And we were talking to them about it, and there's no famous light bulb moment that we were like, let's do it. It sort of just started happening, and before we knew it, we had a couple of cabins. And then we can talk about sort of how it went from there if you want. But it's it just sort of blew up, I guess. Like um, we realized earlier on that a lot of other people were the same as us and looking for this, but we didn't really quite know how many. So when we launched, we basically broke one of Australia's sort of most popular like websites, kind of like Timeout over there, but a slightly different version, and broke it for about 20 minutes because there's so many people who wanted to read the article. And then we just sort of realized, like, okay, we've got to quit our day jobs soon.
Absolutely love it, Cam. And I've had the pleasure of going to one of your locations in Wales here in the UK, which I'll talk about a bit more for our listeners from a first-hand experience. But for people listening, what is the Unyoked experience?
Great question. So our kind of mission is to get more people into nature more often. So if you think about it, by way of an analogy, like what Headspace or Calm did for the meditation market for most people, like there's a lot of people meditating before that, just like there's a lot of people going to nature before now as well. But we're trying to raise awareness for the benefits of nature and how it can help a whole bunch of us in our day to day. There's decades of scientific research there, but for some reason, we all know it when we're there, but we don't connect with it and realize, like, hey, getting out to nature actually helps me de-stress way better than Uber Eats and Netflix does, or it helps me think and prepare for a big project, or be creative way better than just sitting, like fluorescent box does. So we're trying to raise awareness of that, and then we provide immersive, unique, and secluded nature easily and conveniently for people to get those benefits when they need them most. The way we do that at the moment is through a network of off-the-grid, intentionally designed cabins that we tuck on private land within about 2 hours drive or public transport access from a major city. We also design sort of every single little touch point of the experience, from where you park your car to how you grind your coffee, which is by hand to help you slow down and sort of turn what's usually a routine into a ritual. And we do that across the whole experience to promote the way that you can connect with the nature out there and to sort of slow you down and disconnect you from that day to day, so you can really get those benefits yourself and then go back to the city feeling better.
Well, I have to say, Cam, having the your 2-day retreat myself, I completely agree with everything that you've said there. I mean, from the minute we arrived, like the sign where you parked your car says, leave your worries behind. Like the small things, like having the water meter there showing your water consumption, grinding the coffee, taking life a bit slowly, like the windows in the cabin, like the view, how we were secluded in a field. Like I was saying to you before we went on air that, me and my wife both live in a city, Bristol. We've got 2 young children, and we, took the time to go away for the weekend together, spending some quality time together, but also, getting away from it. And as a founder myself, I felt, sometimes life can get quite stressful.
Oh, yeah.
And just giving me an opportunity to reflect on, everything that's happening, thinking about opportunities on the horizon, and just that change in mindset was really fundamental. Just in a 2-day period, I came back feeling like a different person.
Yeah, 100%. And like people, visionaries and founders and artists generally have got this for like thousands, hundreds of years. Like lots of people use nature because they realize this, but for some reason the most of us don't. And that's what Unyoked's all about, is to help people get unyoked, to be unyoked, to have that sort of feeling of freedom and connect with all of those benefits easily and when we need them most. Like, there's so much science out there. Like I think 2 days drops your cortisol levels almost completely. 2 days also boosts your creative problem solving skills by up to 50%. So, instead of, doing some brainstorming and trying to work out, your potentially your fundraising situation or how runway's coming up in 3 months and stuff like that, and doing it in the office, like go out to nature and you could actually come up with a totally different solution with a lot easier, basically.
Yeah, no, I was, like I say, very impressed with the attention to detail, the entire experience from start to finish, and just coming back feeling refreshed. And yeah, as I said, me and my wife both go love the outdoors and go to the Lake District every year. But actually having that space that was secluded, being in the field on our own, not seeing other people, was just quite magical and quite special, actually. So just wanted to feed that back to you guys.
Thanks, man. No, that's really good to hear. You know what? I guess what we're trying to do is help people create what we call a nature habit. So it's less about sort of going on the weekend for holidays and things and replacing like that Lakes District holiday. It's more about sort of plugging that into your Thursdays or your Tuesdays, or like coming up around a certain event or a time or something like that. So it's sort of, we kind of explain it like we're trying to make people see nature like they do the gym or meditation. So when you're training for a certain thing, you go to the gym, or if you're stressed or anxious, you usually meditate. Whereas nature can fix a whole bunch of modern life's problems, and we're just helping people understand that and then letting them connect with it easier.
Awesome, Cam. And sort of rewinding back then, so you talked about obviously the solution was created from personal frustration. I want to know a bit about what kind of validation you did to ensure that there was enough demand. Obviously, you said you kind of built the two cabins and then did this article in the equivalent of Time Out magazine there in Australia. But was that the point with which you knew that there was enough demand? Like, talk to me about, yeah, how you validated the concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not scientific to say this, but we kind of just knew to some degree. Like,
Yeah.
we were the target market, so we were the people that kind of knew that this was out there, that were stressed and working around the clock, that thought that busy was, a word that you had to say to every single person you meet, and this thing just didn't exist. So we sort of predicted that this was going to be a cultural movement across the world, that people would start moving to live and work more flexibly and be closer to nature. And it had already been happening for some a time. Like, bouldering, for example, is getting more and more popular all the time. There are bouldering gyms popping up. I'm sure you've got one in Bristol, knowing what Bristol's
Yeah.
like. And those sort of things, you'd see a lot more nature in like car ads and watch ads. And that's generally because it's such a commodity that basically is, and there's so many different competitors of equaling value. They use things like that to try and differentiate themselves when they actually have nothing to do with it. So the more you see them picking up concepts like that, generally means that it's a trend that's around and going to stay. We also did do some classic research as well, though. So like one of our best pieces of advice to people that ask us, like, why would you give advice to new founders, is actually that generally having worked in another job beforehand is a huge help. So, as part of the strategy department and my brother working in a high-paced startup, we knew all about the sort of lean canvas. We knew about user journey mapping. Like, we knew about all the research of different markets. So we did do a lot of that. Like, one of the biggest things we did at the beginning was that was the most helpful was Airbnb did an exercise back when those guys were starting, and they mapped out what a 10-star, well, 5-star experience was, but they also mapped out from 1 to 5 and from 5 to 10. And we did that back at the very single beginning before we even had a cabin. So we sort of was like, what's a 5-star experience going to look like for Unyoked? And then that's how we built the experience around that. Similar thing for customers. We did a lot of surveys. We sent surveys with a good old-fashioned survey monkey around to a bunch of our friends and got them to share it and then to share it. That's how we came down with 2 hours distance from the cities, for example, because we found that the vast majority of people were willing to drive 3 hours after work on a Wednesday to go somewhere like this. And we wanted to make it extra easy and even more of a delighter for them. So we pulled that down to two. So we did, yeah, a lot of customer research, a lot of talking, and just some planning around what we wanted things to look like, and then it's kind of how we approach things now as well. So it's just a good foundation to kick it off with.
Awesome, Cam. And talk to me a bit about the funding side of it. So I know you said obviously you had friends that were an architect and a builder, but I assume even with doing it sort of with those connections, that the kind of startup cost to get a couple of cabins up and running was quite significant. And also I'd be keen to know a bit about how your model works. So I assume obviously you don't own the land. So could you talk to us a bit about how the business model and the financials work?
Yeah, no worries. So, I mean, yeah, that was good old-fashioned bootstrapping. So we felt like we were in the lucky position to have had decent jobs and saved some money. So it was mainly our own cash. Like we sold any sort of shares that we had, sold any sort of belongings that we didn't need, like old surfboards and stuff like that, and basically just patched the cash together. It wasn't as much as you think. Like the cabins now are a lot more expensive than they were back then,
Sure.
because back then the first two were pretty basic, but still awesome. Like we that's where we built the business from and got great reviews and all of that. But yeah, we just scrounged it up ourselves essentially. We got a little bit of a loan from the bank, sort of pretending that it was for a car, when it definitely wasn't. I think after the first kind of year to help with the next lot. But then after that, we were again pretty lucky and in a humbling position to be approached by a whole ton of different investors after we launched. We got so much media because no one had done this before. So it was quite unique and interesting. And it was, as we'd kind of predicted, something that luckily everyone was looking for. So from then on, we were able to sort of fund via investments, equity investments. So we picked a great handful of investors to come on board for that seed round. Again, not too much. I think it was around 400,000 Australian. And that brought Chris and I full time. Like we worked two jobs like this and our full time day jobs for the first almost 2 years, or 18 months. And then that brought us full time, got us 6 cabins more, and then a little bit of cash to play on some marketing and things like that. But we've actually, we've kept it until recently. Like we've kept it pretty lean, and we sort of taken the approach of raising less in smaller amounts and really getting to the milestones we wanted to, rather than sort of doing the classic startup approach of getting a bucket load of cash and running really fast and fixing it out as you go. We've sort of been a bit more, I don't know if focused is the right word. Like there's nothing to say that one way is better than the other, but we really wanted to create a brand that was authentic and real and stood for something, and an experience that was the tangible representation of that. So we took our time at the beginning there to really do that, and then build the operational backbone that we need to run essentially one room boutique hotels in the middle of nowhere, often without reception and hard to get to. So we knew that was going to be a big piece. So yeah, we took it slow on purpose, built those pieces, and now we're in our 6th year, which is pretty late for most startups. But we've really started putting the foot down. We're in 3 countries and are doing some really fun stuff.
Excellent, Cam. And I'm sure that, approach to growth kind of ties in with your values of being sustainable, doesn't it? In terms of, yeah, you don't want to completely go, rocket fuel and blow up the business. You actually want to take it sustainably, which fits in with your values.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we sort of look to companies like Patagonia as some of our idols and things like that. And, why we love the startup space and what a lot of guys are doing out there, where, we've never been ones for just like, boom or bust sort of approach. Like, I think it does take time to build things right and build and then solve it. And especially, when you're building things in the physical space and basically running a decentralized hotel, there are a lot of different pieces to solve there. So it's been fun and exciting, and there's been ups and downs. But right now we're in a really awesome position where we've nailed all of that. We've proved it at scale, we've proved it globally, and we've sort of got the category creating and owning brand in this space that's expanding across the world. So it's a super exciting time to do some cool stuff.
Excellent. And talk to me about how you find new locations and what diligence and research you do in regards to that.
Yeah, that's right. So you had asked before when I'll take you back through how we found our first locations and then how it's changed. But basically, back when we started, it was definitely one of the challenges we had to overcome at the very beginning. Like no one had done this before, so no one had heard of it. No one knew what a tiny house was. Like we said, a cabin on wheels, and they were like, "What?" And no one like Airbnb was picking up. So people were getting more comfortable with having strangers on their property, but we were going to regional areas. So often, people hadn't been that familiar with Airbnb yet because it was mainly in the cities. So we basically printed out a lot of postcards to start with, and we targeted one particular area south of Sydney because of the type of geography and vegetation, and because of the land sizes. And then we basically did a lot of letterbox drops, and it just had a website, a landing page, had asked for a few details, and then we just made a huge amount of phone calls. So I when I was working at the bank, I'd cast aside some of my calendar time, put like a fake project name in there, and then go and just make a shitload of phone calls to landowners all day, and then we'd go and visit them all basically. And that again, after we launched, that all changed. Like we essentially were operating purely organically with inbound leads for 4 or 5 years. We've only just started turning on our first digital advertising campaigns last quarter. That's for the consumer and for the host side, which is really cool. Like it's kind of humbling to know that the word of mouth is that strong, and just the brand is creating all that. But yeah, we sort of have quite a developed approach now that we've taken what's an intangible sense when you get to a place, of what it needs to be unyoked. There's a term that we use called wilderness vibe, which sounds a bit lame, but basically that's a description of like when you get to the spot and it's that tingle in the back of your neck, it's that feeling that time's slowing down. It's just that feeling that you are, in the middle of nowhere, and you're out there in nature. So we've boiled that down into essentially a set of criteria that we can now pretty easily pick a property looking at some 3D mapping software that we've got and a bunch of different tools. And then we validate it. We work with the host a little bit and do some research and make sure they're our sort of right type of person. And then we'll send one of our scouts out to do the final check. And then from there, it gets put in the pipeline. And then once it's prioritized, we ship it out to Canada.
A word about our sponsors. As a founder, cybersecurity isn't top of your priorities. Yet Alliance has identified cyber threats as one of the top 3 risks facing business globally. This is where Nova Blue comes in. Its founder, Steve Mason, was technical director with GCHQ. He was in charge of keeping the nation safe from cyber threats. He set up Nova Blue to help keep businesses safe. Nova Blue are offering Founded and Grounded listeners a free cybersecurity health check. Simply go to nova-blue.co.uk/podcast offer. Ollie, let's first of all pick up then on the point that you asked him about, which was around validating the concept. So how do you know you're onto something, and how do you know when you've actually done enough research in the first place? Are these people representative? Do I know enough to attract funding? Do I know enough to build something? Do I know enough to flog, or remortgage part of my house? These are important questions, aren't they? And it was interesting how they started from the position of, well, we did something which we were the target market for. Actually, we had a hunch, and there are lots more people like us, and it turned out that's right. And then drawing on their previous work experiences to help them. But yeah, as ever, really interesting to hear how they got to the stage that they are now in those very early days.
I love businesses that are started by people who were trying to solve their own problem, because they really understand the problem in a very deep and meaningful way. They were obviously frustrated, why didn't something better exist? And I think that a lot of great businesses are started like this. I think the benefits of starting a business when you're your own customer are that you obviously know yourself inside out, but also you've got friends who are like-minded and you've got access to them. So what I would say is you've got a really deep understanding of your ideal customer, how they think, what they desire, what their frustrations are. But I guess on the flip side, sometimes what founders can do is they can overcompensate for that. So that they kind of get a bit of a kind of an echo chamber. So you're telling all your mates about this great idea and they're saying, yeah, great, go for it. But really you've got to get objective feedback from the market. But I think ultimately, and I think Cam was quite honest about this, they had this kind of gut feeling that this was a real problem and it was just going to work. And obviously that was quickly validated by this press release that went viral soon after. And they obviously went on to do a lot more research post-launch as well. But I think when they initially pressed that launch button, they did it with a sort of inner confidence.
And it is that inner confidence, isn't it? That, you know, at points I've definitely lacked that. I've thought, oh, this would be a great idea because I really like it and there must be other people who would really like it. And then kind of stumbled at that point thinking, oh, I don't quite know how the next bit sort of happens. And I suspect that's something that does happen to other people as well. But listening to them reminds me that, you know, we should have that confidence, and then you take it forward. And of course you do wider surveys and testing the market and everything that they did. But that's a good enough starting point. You know, if it actually, I suppose what we're saying to anyone listening is, if this resonates with you, if there's something where you spot there is a gap in the market, something that you think you would benefit from, and friends or other people of a similar sort of community to you, then that's good enough to make a start. So, you know, take a bit of confidence from these guys' story, because they are proof of that, aren't they? On the subject of growth and raising enough money, I also thought it was positive to hear how they kind of started off, you know, looking around the room going, what can we sell? We'll sell our surfboard, you know, to raise the money, because I think it's easy to look at where someone is now. And if you look at their website now, it's beautiful. You see their cabins as you have their, you know, they are also blissful. But look, let's take it right back. This started in this way, a couple of guys selling their stuff, doing it alongside other work as well. And they have gradually grown it to what it is now as well. It's gone beyond a couple of cabins. I think it's easy to forget that, isn't it? Or to just, be put off by the shiny brilliance of what the end result of several years of hard work is.
Yeah, and I love going back to that origin of exactly when it started, because as you say, selling some of their personal items that they could use to fund the business, but also bringing some friends in terms of builders and architects. And you've just got to have that hustle about you to kind of pull in favours left, right and centre to get things off the ground. And I think that's how you go from that initial idea to actually making something a reality. And what I really loved, and I did smile about this, was how they got their initial bank loan, because obviously getting a loan for a business that hasn't got any trading history is very hard, no matter where you are in the world. Here in the UK, we have the startup loan scheme to obviously bridge that gap, but it is still quite hard and comprehensive to get approved for funding. And I know that firsthand from working on the scheme for over 5 years. So I really love what these guys said. They went out and got a loan for a fictitious car to obviously fund the business and get it off the ground, because it's a lot quicker and it's just easier. There's less barriers and friction to actually getting that money. And it's a shame things are like that, but you know, you've got to do what you've got to do at the time, really.
Yeah, briefly, two things. Number one, if you were going for a loan, I mean, the bank manager is going to expect you to have put in what you can put in. You know, if they come around your house and see that you've got a really nice car on the drive, and you've got a lovely fish tank with loads of fish in, they might be like, why haven't you invested a bit more of your own stuff in it? So there is that expectation, I guess, too. But also, Ollie, is that how you mentioned the startup loan? People might not know of that. Where would you go to find out about it, and what sort of money are you talking about?
Yeah, so if you go on to the Startup Loans website, if you just Google it, if you're here in the UK, essentially it's a personal loan that's being used for business purposes. You can apply for up to 25 grand per director of the business, up to a maximum of 100k obviously if there's 4 co-founders.
So you need to be a limited company or something like that, do you?
No, you don't need to be a limited company. You can be a sole
Okay.
trader as well, but it is a personal loan, so you are personally liable for that. So we obviously
Right.
look at things like your contingency plan. What happens if it goes wrong? How are you going to repay the money?
Okay.
So yeah, a really good resource to get your business off the ground. On average, people get around sort of £12,000 to get the business off the ground here in the UK.
Okay, yes, about like a car loan, like you say. In the old days, they're all a bit more expensive now. Okay, cool, that's handy. Let's move on then to the next part. And so now we know they're doing really well. They've got quite a few cabins, from a couple of cabins to 80 odd in various different countries, and plans to go elsewhere too. But of course, they've been experiencing and dealing with failures along the way. That's part of the parcel. And they've learned plenty of lessons, which they're going to share with us.
It's a good question. It's hard to know because and like I'm not. We're usually pretty humble guys, so not sort of saying this in by way of a boast, but there haven't really been many failures. It's more just like a Murphy's Law kind of thing. Like that's the governing law of the startup world. That just whatever can go wrong will go wrong all the time, whenever you like don't think it's going to. So I don't know. Like one of the very early things, like we um, research, like for example, we've got composting toilets in the cabins, right? So that's basically, yeah, like what you think it is. But the early model was a little bit different. There weren't many on the market back then, so there's like one supplier for the whole of Australia. And we started cleaning the cabins ourselves because we wanted to take the operations back to first principles and build them from the ground up to be as scalable as possible. So that would be me every now and then driving down 2 hours from the city before a board meeting at the bank in my like work attire to go and empty a composting toilet and then hope that I didn't get any of it on me, and then going back to the city like for 8 a.m. for a meeting. So that was definitely interesting, and like you think you've worked hard until you're doing that at like 4 a.m. going down to do that shit. Um, but what else? I mean, we've been through a lot. Like we've been through once in a lifetime bushfires. We've been in for like once in a lifetime floods, which I'm starting to sound like the media
Wow.
now, but it's ridiculous. And then and COVID as well, right? So we've had kind of everything
Mm.
thrown at us, and now it's a recession. So we've had sort of everything thrown at us every single year, and it's just about basically being resilient, keeping positive, and approaching everything with sort of a problem solving mindset. Like it's and then luckily the business that we've built is about helping people access places that can make you feel better and de-stress. So we definitely take advantage of our own product a shitload of the time as well, which really helps the whole time. If you've just gone through crazy bushfires and then suddenly that you can see that COVID's there, like you need some time outdoors.
Love that, love that. Getting high on your own supply there,
Yeah.
in a good way. Excellent. And obviously, you guys are past the 5 year point of trading, which most startups up to 90% fail before then. And like you say, all the the pandemics, floods, etc., that have been along the way, and you're still here standing and growing, which is great to hear. I want to know a bit about working with your twin, Chris. What are the plus sides of that, but also what are the downsides?
Great question. I mean, the plus sides, like, I guess from the fundraising perspective, like a big thing for investors is founder risk. It's something that they don't usually talk to you about, but is definitely in the back of their mind. Like if you're two co-founders that have just met on some co-founding dating site and you've got an idea,
Yeah.
like that's a huge risk, right? Because they don't know your dynamics, they don't know how you're going to go, and the statistics are that most co-founders do like they fail because of incompatibility. When you're a twin, that doesn't happen. So, like blood is thicker than whatever they say. But it's, we know that you're never going to have that opportunity, that there's never going to be that sort of worry there. So from the fundraising perspective, it's a big tick. Personally, it's also great. Like we're twins, but from very early age, our mum made sure that we were always in different classes, always in different groups at school and stuff like that. So we weren't the same people like the twins. We were different individuals. So while we're being quite different people and different personalities, we've also obviously had a lot of the same experiences for, the last 36 years. So we come at problems from very different perspectives and very different sides, but we'll often reach the same conclusion together. So that's sort of, I guess, built in us and the DNA of the business, like a huge amount of collaboration for like creative collaboration for how we get to ideas, but it also makes us value different perspectives and sort of check a whole bunch of different actions and angles before we get to an answer rather than jumping to it. On the downside of that, we have got a lot of shared experiences for 36 years. So it's you sometimes come in with assumptions or with certain feelings and stuff like that. So I'd be lying to say that there's never an argument, but it's usually pretty good. And I think all in all, it's a super powerful thing.
And I imagine you get to the bottom of the argument quicker than most co-founders would, because you can be so open and honest with each other because you know each other so well. And hats off to your mum as well for, obviously your upbringing there and making you two individuals, because often you can see twins being very similar as well. So hats off to mum. So outside of obviously Chris, who do you call when things aren't going to plan?
Probably a couple of my mates, to be honest. I mean, my partner obviously as well. Like my girlfriend Ariane, like we confide in each other of a lot of that stuff. And like even though she's not in the startup sort of world and like is I guess a bit shielded from a lot of the day to day and the stuff that you as a founder will go through, it's such a great sounding board for so many things. One of the biggest benefits that we've got, are friends who are founders, though, like a network of founders and people that are, going through the same shit. Like they're looking at runway and being like, what are we going to do? They're dealing with like difficult investors. They're dealing with like all kinds of Murphy's Law. Like it does help just having, a little bit of a bitch sometimes and getting that off your chest. And so, that I think founders and then just good mates. Like I think it's just such a core thing to have a strong support network and some friends around you and make sure you're not pushing them away as you are sort of super head down and running a million miles an hour. It's so easy to do, but if you lose that, it'd be much harder.
Completely echo that there, Cam. And can you tell me about one sacrifice that you've made along building your startup, either consciously or unconsciously?
It's a good question, to be honest. I'm definitely surfing a lot less, that's for sure. um, but yeah, let me like we've got a sort of way of thinking that I can't remember where we heard it. I'm sure it's one of your listeners is going to know it. Like it's just somewhere out there. But there's sort of three like spheres of life. There's work, there's health, and there's relationships. And generally, you can only be really focusing well on two of them out of three of them. So I don't feel like I've sacrificed one thing necessarily. I think it depends on the time and the place, but one of those buckets is generally not functioning at its best. Like sometimes, you might not go to the gym for a couple of days, or sometimes, you might not see your partner for a little while. Or sometimes you just, well, actually, usually never you drop the work priorities. That's always the focus as a founder. So it's one of the other two that drops. But it depends on the time and the place, to be honest.
Awesome, Cam. And talk to me a bit about obviously the decision to launch in the UK and how you manage this remotely from Australia.
Great question. I mean, we don't manage it full or remotely. Like we've got an epic team over there. Our GM Alex is actually a UK kid. He grew up and he's going to hate me for not knowing this exact, but down towards Cornwall. I keeps trying to get me to go surfing down there when we're over, and I'm like, man, it's way too cold. Um, but yeah, we've got a great GM, Alex, and then a couple of others, George and Ellen and Joel over there as well. So a little office that just hums. But I don't know, the decision for us, like again, looking at kind of Patagonia and a few other brands that we value, we're creating a category is what we see us doing. Like we're not accommodation, we're not a hotel. We represent this way of life that's closer to nature, and that's what we want to be for people. And we to own that and to be the sort of the ones that drive this space forward and genuinely help people connect with nature more you do need to be in other places. You can't just be in one country. So from day one, we always knew that we were going to grow and go overseas. Not necessarily, putting thousands of cabins in every country, but growing just like we did here in Australia, authentically, sustainably, but in different locations at the same time. The UK made sense for a whole ton of reasons, like speaks English, big centralized populations around, and then lots of nature around as well. And luckily, our GM Alex, he actually worked with us for a few years beforehand as well. So it's sort of a lot of things.
Oh wow.
Yeah, a lot of things fell together. It's obviously also the biggest market in Europe. And something about, everyone asked us why not the US, and something about the US just didn't excite us at the time. And we thought Europe was going to be more exciting. And then leading up with all of those other strategic choices, it just made sense to head over there. And one of the most important points is we think people in London and to a lesser degree the other cities, but definitely London, like they need this. You spend some time on the tube, and you just like, holy shit, I need some nature. So we just knew that it didn't exist there when we were first planning to move over there, and that I think then a few others sort of popped up doing similar things. But it's such a big space, and we just think it's going to be awesome over there, and already is.
Ollie, I like listening to Cam and the way he speaks about this. He was just very matter of fact in a way that, okay, I mean, things might have got him down, but actually it's just finding a way forward. And he said, governing law of the startup world, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. But he also said they weren't failures. It's just like these things will happen, which is I was listening carefully to his language, and that's a subtle difference. That's the difference between someone who's like, oh, this went wrong again. What are we going to do? This is just a nightmare. I can't deal with this. And the person who has to ride these various waves, or bucket loads of stuff being sent in their direction. And they have had a lot: floods, bushfires, COVID, whatever else. And just how they keep going. And he's definitely got the outlook of someone who is going to have a business that will keep going for as long as he wants it to, I sense.
100%.
Whereas others might have fallen.
Yeah, and I think, having that attitude of, acknowledging Murphy's Law about, if something's going to go wrong, it will go wrong, and probably at the worst possible time when you least expect it. So I think if he's going in with that attitude, then, things that get thrown at them, they're not going to be overfazed by it, because they're going to react to it and come up with a solution. And I think that attitude and that mindset, as you say, is going to, ensure that they continue to grow, as they have been doing from those initial cabins to over 80, operating in 4 different countries. And one of the things that really made me laugh was going in, having to go and empty these compost loos at 4 a.m. and then going back into the corporate job the next day. And I'm just thinking about what the conversation was probably like at the time. Cam, so how was your evening? Well, I had next to no sleep, and I was kind of knee deep emptying a dunny. But that's the life of a founder, isn't it? At that stage of the journey.
Yeah, and I can relate to this because I've got a relative who has a campsite, and they have compost toilets as well. And just before we started recording, they sent me a picture of a grass snake in the bit where they're sort of where they're composting stuff. And I was like, grass snakes are perfectly harmless. It's all fine. You don't need to worry. But yeah, it's true. There is this other struggle. We need to see this. We need to kind of be real about it. And it's great that he was sharing that. And that's what they've had to do for several years until they can get to the point with the investment where they could focus on this full time. But yeah, it's what it takes, isn't it? And I guess everyone will have their own story about the things they're trying to combine, whether it's, well, being a parent is an extra layer, but whatever it might be, juggling several jobs or more just to try and make it all work. But worth it. Clearly they've picked something they love, and that's what makes it worth it each time. One of the exciting things about these two, I say these two, I can't help it, it's because they're twin brothers. So Cam and Chris, we've been talking to Cam, is his co-founder, is his twin, and the benefits of having a twin and the sort of reduction of risk as far as others are concerned, and all the shortcuts that you have when you are family. But I wondered, we can't just suddenly magic a twin, even if we might like to. What advice, what do you sort of see, Ollie, with all the businesses that you've worked with over the years who do have successful co-founder relationships? What things are they doing that, you notice, or what are people looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good at the start of a co-founding relationship to have that real honest and deep chat about,
Hmm.
what your ambitions are, what are you worried about, but most
Okay.
importantly, I'd say what are your values, because those are going to be deeply embedded in each other, and they probably won't change much over the length of running, say, a 10-year business.
So when you say values, what kind of things are you saying that two people would need to give me a little example of what you mean?
So it's looking at your personal values, because often they're going to really represent the business as well. So, like, what
Okay.
matters to you? Is it being sustainably minded, or is it going for growth at all costs? Because those things can't often exist together. And going back
Mm.
to Cam, he was saying, about they could have taken on perhaps VC money after obtaining their angel round for their seed funding, but it's about growing the business in a sustainable way. Whereas if he didn't have Chris as his co-founder and he had somebody else who was really growth minded, they would have said, well, no, let's take on some VC funding, let's really turbocharge the business and grow to 300
Mm.
cabins in the next year. So if your values aren't the same, then you're going to have conflict, and making decisions is then going to be hard. And ultimately, if decisions start to be hard, it's going to impact the business, and then
Yeah.
often this is going to result in, you know, a failing co-founder relationship, because you haven't got that alignment with one another, and it's going to end in divorce and the failure
Or
of the
loss of
business.
friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's, the next thing, if it's not with family, then it might be a friendship. And actually, that can be difficult because you have perhaps an established pattern. So I think it just makes it even more important to have that conversation at the beginning. Don't assume that you know or that you are on the same page, because this is going to be quite a different thing to be doing together to, to anything else that you might have done. So I certainly think, please don't assume that it's all okay just because you're good friends. I think you definitely need this. It's really important that you want to come out with the friendship at the other end of it. So you definitely should.
It's a great point, Lauren. Also, I'd say just think about the stage of life that you're both in as well.
Yeah.
Like, if one
Yeah.
person's sort of maybe mid-20s and the other person's, say, early 40s, then your priorities are naturally going to be quite different. Somebody
Mm.
might be, saving for a car or a house, and the other person might be obviously spending a lot of money on their mortgage and their family. So
Yeah.
you've got to think about that and how that's going to play out in the longer term.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so to the third and final part of your conversation with Cam, and a bit of future gazing, looking ahead to what the next 5 years holds for Unyoked.
So, Cam, you created the category, and you mentioned obviously there's new entrants coming to the market. I actually originally worked with the guys from Unplugged
Oh yeah.
to help them get a startup loan, and I know there's others that have started up in the UK as well. So, how do you see obviously more people coming into the market impacting the future of Unyoked?
We see it only as a good thing, to be honest. Like, where again, our mission is more people in nature more often. It's an education thing, and it's going against the grain. The conventional world is still stuck in that whole 9 to 5 way of thinking. Even after COVID, people are going back to that instead of changing it. So the more people that are sharing this message, the more people that are helping people get out to nature and realize that instead of sitting in four walls and under a fluorescent light, you should be outside more often. It's only good for the space. You look at hotels, like there's thousands of rooms in one city, let alone outside of that. So there's tons of space around. We keen to be the leader in there, and but we're really just happy doing our own thing and staying authentic and doing this and that. So it's cool to see other people coming up. It's kind of exciting and humbling that this little thing that we thought was going to be fun back like 6 years ago, it's sort of become so massive and big. And yeah, we sort of love connecting with all the other guys. There's some really cool shit going on in a lot of different countries, and kind of cool to see that a lot of people are doing slightly different things as well. Like, yeah, like focusing on say digital detox, or focusing on a slightly more premium market, or focusing on like longer things. And there's a whole bunch of different angles there. So yeah, I think it's really exciting.
I love that, Cam. And the reason I asked, actually, because we had a recent guest on the show, Dan Murray-Serter from a business called Heights, and they created a category themselves called Brain Care. And they, like you, see it as a good thing in terms of new people coming into the market and actually building out the ecosystem, and it kind of raises everyone's game. And
Yeah.
as you say, people will specialise in particular verticals as well, which is great to see. And Cam, I know you've got a question for our listeners.
Yeah, I did. So I think that's yeah great. I think that your podcast does, and ask a bit of a question, see what everyone knows, and get some comments going, some discussion. So I've been talking a lot about obviously nature being good for you and all this kind of stuff, and we'll see how many people that are listening believe it already or understand it. But my kind of questions around that and the sort of founder space. So I was keen to know how many people knew which famous founder was or is known to use nature in their routines to help them think and come up with better ideas. And those choices are Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Phil Knight from Nike, or all of the above.
Fantastic question there, Cam, and we'll get some answers to that on our socials for you as well. Now, the next part of the show is a key tenet of Founded and Grounded. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, Cam. If you could distill down just one piece of advice for either an early stage founder or somebody thinking of starting a business, what would that be?
Well, I'll tell you what, Ollie, I'll give you two, and you guys can either choose to give them both, or you can cut one out, and we'll see how it goes. But the two are, so one is it's more of a way of thinking, and again, I can't remember who said it. I can't claim that we're smart enough to have made it up, but it's been a guiding light from day one for us, and it's the saying that you should be uncompromising on the vision, but flexible on the details. And it's that, it's the way you have to be, just as long as you're shooting hard for where you're going to get to and what the business is all about and that goal. It doesn't matter how you get there. You can zig, you can zag, you can go backwards, you can go forwards. But if you stay true to your vision, that's where success lies, and authenticity. The second one, and this is so cliche, but it's true. This is how things become cliche, but it's choose something that you're actually passionate about and is actually you and that you care about. Like it sounds obvious, but it, doing a startup is a lot of work. It is a huge amount of work. Like there's very unlikely that you're going to be a unicorn in 5 years. You're going to be, at a mid-level stage dealing with a whole ton of stuff and Murphy's Law every day. So being able to wake up in the morning and feeling actually good and excited about it, or being able to use your product and having that moment of connection where you're like, okay, yeah, I know why we're doing this. It really does go a massive long way.
Fantastic two bits of advice there, and we'll definitely keep both of those in, Cam, because those were great and so true as well. And lastly, where can people find out a bit more about you personally, but also Unyoked?
Unyoked is just unyoked.co. If you type Unyoked in Google, we'll be the first one there and all over the page. It's a very unique word. For anyone that's guessing as well, unyoked, it is a real word. It means to be set free. So a yoke used to be the thing that would connect an ox or a horse to a cart in the field. So it's sort of to be connected, to be forced to work, to be an element of sort of slavery. Whereas to be unyoked means to be set free, and that's what our whole mission is. Me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn via the Unyoked page, or just by looking up Cam Grant.
Well, Cam, listen, thank you so much for your time, insights, and it's so great to hear about everything that you've achieved at Unyoked.
No worries, man. It was great chatting. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much, but thanks for having me on the show, and looking forward to getting you and some of the listeners out and Unyoked.
Let's begin by talking about creating a category. It's something I was thinking about as the two of you were talking, and I made a little note to myself, and clearly you were having the same thoughts, thinking about Dan. as a previous guest on this podcast. So I had never really considered this, and that's about probably the size of my ambition as opposed to anything else. But the idea that they're creating a new category and what that means in terms of what they are going to do and also how they view other people working in the same area, I thought was really interesting and actually helpful to think about. So, yeah, is this about size of ambition when someone says they want to create a new category? Are they really, I'm not going to say, are they really doing that? But what did you kind of think of that?
I think it's the single biggest thing that you can do to really differentiate yourself from the competition, because you're literally creating your own lane and there's nobody else in it. So
That's a really good point.
I think there's there's no competition. But what it does require real conviction and being quite bold. It requires a deep understanding of the market, but really being clear on your USP. And obviously what it does also need is a large marketing budget to be able to sort of create it and be able to sort of take that to market. Because if you don't, then you're not gonna be able to educate consumers about the importance of the market. So you do need a bit of a good budget to be able to take that forwards. And I think what we've previously learned from Dan, and also what Cam was reiterating, was the fact that you need businesses to come and play in your space to make it better for all. It's not a zero-sum game. Like somebody doesn't win and then somebody else has to lose. It can be better for all the larger the market is.
Yeah. Yes, I think he said, but just think about how many hotels there are, for example, or I used to say to friends when they'd be like, someone else has started the same thing as me and it really drives me mad. And I know that feeling, and it comes from a sense of like fear of you still want yours to be good enough and you don't want to miss out on opportunities. So I totally get that. But how many hairdressers are there? Just think about high streets. There are tons on the high street, aren't there still? You might have 5 in a small town, which has then got, charity shops, your paper shop, and not a whole lot else, right? But somehow they're still there. And it's that same sort of thing. Don't let that put you off. There are so many differences, aren't there, between each of us as individuals, and that translates as our business. So, personal connection, it really varies as to what each of us wants, doesn't it? But yeah, I thought absolutely the right way to view it, but I know that it would give some people a bit of a wobble. So it's just that reassurance. If that's what you discover, that you think you found something great and then someone else is doing it, well, okay, so what?
Yeah, and what I would say is, like, if you are, say, second to market, it's not a bad thing, because there's an established customer base there already, and you can tap into that. And what I would also say is, if you're creating this category, is that it will attract further competition, as we know, and it might attract competition from some of the big players, and you're not going to be able to compete on budget or price, because they're going to have a lot more purchasing power than you are. So what it means is that you really have to stay true to your original values, and your loyal customer base that you've already developed. So what I would say is, don't be afraid by the incoming competition if you have created your category, because it's something that you can fight on different grounds. It doesn't need to be on price.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're all about the encouragement today. That's what I'm feeling. The reassurances of any wobbles that you might have. Cam has shared a question for listeners. I'm not going to give the answer to this. Do you think you know it, Ollie?
Might have an inkling, but it'd be interesting to see what our listeners have to say.
Yes, so it's the one about founders using nature to help them with their business and their life in general. So if you want to chip in and get involved in this, you can find us on social media, search for Founded and Grounded, and you'll see us there. Please do come and comment. We always like to hear from you. And he also shared some great pieces of advice there about having that, not compromising on your vision, but being flexible on the details, and then picking something that you're passionate about as well. It's always good to hear how our founders just distill that into one little nugget at the end. You can find Cam and the team. They are at unyoked.co, as you know. But whilst we're talking social, and getting involved. Let's just have a little moment where we hear from our community lead, from Samantha, and just find out what you've been saying in response to the previous founder that we had, where they also asked a little question. So Sam, perhaps you can do the honours and just remind us of what that question is and who we had.
In our last episode, we spoke to Johnny Palmer, a serial entrepreneur who took us through his journey in the business world. Johnny had a few questions to share with you all, just like each of our guests poses a question to our audience. Johnny this time came with 3 key questions that are really important to consider if you are a startup founder. His questions were, do you want to succeed? And prompted us to think hard about that one. Question 2, what does success mean to you? Is it money? Is it changing the world? Is it status or ego? Is it making a point to somebody? And prompted us to think about being honest with ourselves about that and really consider what that looks like for us as individuals. Question 3, are you prepared to do what it takes to achieve the kind of success you want? These were such interesting and really important questions to be prompted. And this series of questions that Johnny gave us to self-reflect on are really beneficial to consider as an entrepreneur ourselves. So many people didn't feel comfortable sharing this in the public forum, but I know lots of you self-reflected on this and really considered each of these questions and how they impact on an individual basis. We did have a few responses to this series of questions, one of which was from Roger Jackson, who came up with an analogy for success, which we loved. He suggested that success as a founder is very akin to how you feel when, from the touchline, you see your 9-year-old score his or her first ever goal in a soccer match or catch their first boundary ball in a cricket game. It's just the same, but on a slightly bigger scale. And we completely agree. It's so similar, and so many people make those correlations between being a parent and that pride that you feel and having a business. We've all heard the comments of referring to a business as somebody's baby, and of course it does give people that pride and that emotional feeling. So definitely success is a very proud moment and something very personal too. So I hope you found those questions a good prompt to self-reflect on, and if you do have any comments you would like to share, or even just whether it made you think about something in particular or prompted you to reflect on your business, we would love to hear. We always like to hear your thoughts, answers to the questions and feedback as well. So come and find us on any of the social media channels and share your thoughts with us. We'd love to hear.
Thank you so much for listening.